the bottom line is I'm hoping that you're all here to have a look at some of the magic of NLP, how it works, and so that you'll be able to take some techniques away with you that you'll be able to actually apply out in the real world. Now, neuro-linguistic programming sounds as if it's something that's actually quite complex, but you'd be amazed. It's actually really, really straightforward. Some of the things that you think of and the things that you do in your everyday life are actually we just rename and relabel a whole bunch of them, and it ends up in the text of NLP. So, for example, have you ever forgotten something? Okay, certainly. Have you ever created a method by which to remember things? Well, that's a little program. So when we're really talking about the subject of NLP, all we're really talking about is the subject of behaviour. So, how many of you have got great behaviours? Good. How many of you... And you see, that's the thing, is we've all got behaviours. Now, the thing is, if you've got a behaviour that's actually working for you, then we're going to refer to it as a good behaviour. However, if you've got exactly the same behaviour in a different situation, we might refer to it as a lousy behaviour. So on one day you might do something that works brilliantly, but the next day, and have you ever gone into a situation where you go, next time I'm never going to do that? And you won't do it until you're halfway through next time, and then you realise, oh damn, I'm halfway through it. The ability to choose and change behaviour is possibly one of the greatest skills that you can ever acquire. So when we really look at the subject of NLP, it's about a system of decoding behaviour, number one, and number two, it's the ability to install it in others. So, is it possible that one person could do something absolutely brilliantly, and you'd like to replicate their skill? The first thing we have to do is decode the very nature of the behaviour and then have it installed. So, what sort of things? We could look at weight loss, food, salespeople, yes, how highly successful salespeople do things, how people may lose weight and keep it off. We might look at the subject of happiness. I was watching a program last night on how a series of people live into being 100 or like 101, 110, something of this nature. The world record at the moment is 123, and they're trying to push that out at the moment. And so my question would be, if the subject is longevity, what's the behaviours that these individuals are participating in, that if we took on those behaviours, that we'd actually... Yeah. Do you realise that there are some people who just eat pretty much whatever they want, and for some reason, they just don't seem to put on weight, and yet other individuals seem to be able to look at food and put on weight. Other people, doesn't matter what happens, they're just miserable. And yet to another individual, doesn't matter what happens, they're just happy. These are very defined behaviours. So you're right in what you're saying before about the subject of selling, but it could be about learning, it could be about memory, because all of these things are just simply behaviours. So I think the good thing is, number one, there is no such thing as a good or bad behaviour. The question is it appropriate and does it fit? Now, many of the behaviours that we actually learn or take on board, we learn from a very young age. Now, how many of you are going to hand all of your financial dealings across to a 5-year-old? Okay. And, why not? Primarily because they may not have the experience of these sorts of things. And yet many of our emotional responses and the vast majority of our behaviours are actually installed when we're really, really young. And so if you wouldn't hand, say, for example, your financial dealings across, why would you hand... I was talking to Mary Lynn last night about another individual that we know, and that we recognise that a lot of their behaviour is actually put in place when they were a young child. They threw a tantrum, they got away with it, and so as a byproduct, they've now learnt that the way to get what you want is to throw a tantrum. Now, that may work in a whole bunch of environments, but throw a tantrum in front of a policeman, see what happens. Okay. So the thing is, it's about picking the right behaviour for the right situation, and yet if we're conditioned or behaviourally conditioned to only have one choice, then in a weird sort of way, we're also programmed to fail. Because if we've only got one choice, if we've only got one behaviour, then the issue is that's it. So what we're talking about here is, as we take on board new behaviours, what happens is we have a much greater sense of direction and we can do things significantly faster. From a hypnotic point of view and a clinical point of view, there are things that we can do within an NLP realm that a lot of psychologists may take anything up to 18 months to achieve. But we may take the same number of minutes to achieve the same outcome. So, anybody here have problems with relationships? Never? Okay. I'll take that as a yes. Okay. Anybody have problems with, and you'd be surprised, the word addiction here. You think, oh, addiction is addiction to alcohol or tobacco. But truthfully, addiction... Ice cream, good. Chocolate, chewing gum, gambling. Some people are addicted to sleep. Some people... so the subject of addiction is actually anything that you can't control. So eating, gym, exercise is a real... it's lesser nowadays, but around 20 years ago, it was a significant number of individuals which are simply burning out because of their addiction to gym. So, given that that's the case, we once again, good behaviour, bad behaviour, really quite irrelevant. The only thing that matters is the behaviour that I'm doing getting me to my objective? Now, for example, one of the big things that sort of comes up, do you realise in a selling environment, we've actually got to be quite self-centred. In other words, me getting my objective is actually more important than me protecting you. But what happens if my behaviour is always based on me looking out for you? And so if I'm trying to sell something to you because it's a really good idea, but if you come up with an objection, who's selling who now? You may actually talk me out of the sale and say, no, that's not the right thing to do. We need to go in a different direction. Whereas a highly successful salespeople or person will generally have their own self-interest. And so something that may be a good behaviour in one environment could be absolutely disastrous in a selling environment. And yet, you might go, but isn't being self-centered or having like a sense of self or a very strong sense of self a bad thing? And the answer is clearly not, because if you want to be a leader, that very strong sense of self, and this is the direction that we are going to go in, and I know this, and this is the best thing for you to go in that direction, is absolutely imperative. Do you get the... So that becomes the mechanics. So no such thing as good, no such thing as bad. It's all about appropriateness. And we could go really extreme. Many of the religions are very, very good to say, sex is bad. Good. But hang on. If we really take that to the extreme, then nobody gets born. Okay. So obviously, there's a lot of people who are not quite playing by the rules that they set, or miraculous conception is happening a lot more frequently than we. So the whole point is all behaviours are not to be measured in good and bad. It's just, are they reaching our goal? And all of you are going to have. How many of you have had a goal that you realise that you simply have a tendency of drifting away from? And that could be like either losing weight or earning money or building something or learning how to play an instrument or forming a relationship. And you go, look, but you know the right way of doing things, but you just find yourself doing the wrong thing. And you just constantly find yourself doing the wrong thing. Instead of going and doing the exercise and eating the right food, all of a sudden you're back to your old habit. And the reason for this is it's just a little program. What we're going to be looking at this evening is some really simple technique for changing behaviour. Delightfully simple and quick. And I'm a real fan for quick too, by the way. And as we said, most of the behaviour before the age of 7. How old does a baby have to be before they actually start manipulating their parents? How old do you think?
A few minutes.
Yeah, the information that I've got is about 2 hours. Okay, so with the subject of crying, they're already recognising that if they cry, they will get something. If they cry, they will get something. If they cry, someone will come to and be able to support them. And so how long does it take for the child to learn? And it learns some very, very important things in those first minutes. Sometimes it's even in uterine that the child is learning things. If we go back in history, there are some beliefs and values that are established whilst a child is in the uterus. For example, if the mother is incredibly stressed while she's carrying the child will collect all of the information, the stress, and it then makes a decision whilst it's still inside the womb, which is life a nice place or is it a scary place? And based on that decision, it will actually look at the world from that point of view from that moment on. And it's a little bit like, are you going to be born absolutely chilled out? And you go, but isn't chilled out the right way to be? And I'm going, remember I said there's no such thing as a good behaviour or a bad behaviour. If you're actually wired and always looking for the threat, there is a good chance that you will live a significantly shorter life, because your adrenal glands and cortisol levels would be much higher, which helps you age, definitely has an effect on obesity, definitely has an effect on heart condition, all sorts of heart conditions. But you're wired and alive. If there's any threat in the environment, you're ready to bounce. Whereas the other person who's really chilled out, who's the first one to get munched by the predator? So again, nothing right, nothing wrong. But the one that's really chilled out, there's a good chance it will live a lot longer if it survives the predators. So again, even something as diverse as whether we're wired or whether we're chilled will have an effect. And these things are all just programs that are put in place early on in childhood. So, what does it all mean? Do you have to live with old programs? Or could we choose? I like to think of it as, there's a stupid joke, but it really does sum it up. There's a man who comes into a work site, and every day he comes to the work site, sits down for lunch, opens the tin and goes, not peanut butter again. Next day opens, not peanut butter, and after about 3 weeks, the guy sitting opposite him says, why don't you get your wife to make something else? He said, I'm not married. I make my own sandwiches. And how many of us do this?